All right, time is 3:30, so we're going to get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I believe everybody is here except for Mr. Finley, for the record. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into it. We need to consider approval of the August 4th meeting minutes. Is there any questions or discussion? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Motion to approve. All right, we have a motion to approve in a second. All in favor? All right, motion passes. We have a couple people signed up for public comments today, but I believe that is associated with specific agenda items, so we'll save those comments for that time. We'll go ahead and jump right into the action agenda item 4A, and I'd like to turn that over to staff and/or the applicant.
How's everyone doing? Okay. So we're bringing back the TA 2206 building height text amendment from DDRTC Birkdale Village. And here you're going to see the building heights that were allowed with the zoning ordinance that was approved in 1996. And back then, obviously, the population was much smaller. And with that, they kind of had a goal of maintaining a small town feel. And that involved maxing out the height at the 48 feet, which you see in the shop front building type. As the town's population increased, the zoning ordinance also evolved. In 2008, a text amendment came through to increase the height to a max height of 182 feet in the transit-oriented development zoning district, which I believe is for the Brighton development. And then later in 2018, another text amendment allowed hotels in the highway commercial district to go above the permitted max height to 6 stories with a special use permit. And that brings us to today with Birkdale coming through and proposing a text amendment to allow hotels and commercial uses in the urban workplace building type up to 145 feet and their associated parking decks up to 70 feet in height. This text amendment would only be within the highway commercial zoning district and within the permitted or an approved pedestrian-oriented development. And with that, they would also have to apply for a special use permit. And here you can see a map of the highway commercial zoning district within the town currently. And here, obviously, Birkdale Village is the only pedestrian-oriented development currently in Huntersville. A pedestrian-oriented development is currently only allowed in highway commercial, and it requires at least 1 parking space per dwelling unit to be placed in a wrap parking deck. The parking deck needs to be wrapped with attached homes, apartment buildings, and mixed-use buildings, and 20% of the habitable first floor space must be commercial uses. So it's quite specific and where and what you can do within a pedestrian-oriented development. TA 2206, or within the special use permit, under this text amendment, it also has conditions, and one of those conditions is that any structure in which a hotel or motel, including the commercial use, is the principal or accessory use, shall be separated by a distance no less than 3 times the height of the proposed structure closest to the common lot line of the adjoining residential and mixed-use zone, but in no case less than 100 feet. And this map kind of shows you the current, or where they're proposing those structures and how far they are from the closest residential lot lines. I believe with the max height of 145 feet, they would need at least 400 and I think it's 25 feet. So you can see that it's well beyond that. The rezoning plan also being submitted by Birkdale is going to go alongside the text amendment. The text amendment would have to be approved prior to the rezoning plan. This kind of shows just the outline of where that rezoning plan applies. And here's the most recent rezoning plan that was given to staff. The applicant has also provided us with some visuals of how the height appears from all of those 7 locations. And once I go through these, I'll let the applicant kind of explain some of it if they want to, so I don't speak for them. Do you kind of want to, yeah, if you want to go through some of these?
So here we are. Robert Irvin, 19726, Irvin Law Group, Cornelius, North Carolina. And so on the presentation I sent you, we had the little mini map in there too. So it's hard. You can switch back. Yeah. So number 1, you see right there. There's Birkdale, and we're facing. It's up towards the back, towards the greens at Birkdale, the green at Birkdale back there. And so if you go to the next one, you can kind of see that's looking from that view, and you can see there the parking structure that would be 67 feet tall. So yeah, go back to just to show you. So number 2 there, that's looking a little bit more out that way. And so yeah, I guess now go to 2 here. And so that corner right there would be the office building that would be showing up right there from that view. And then I think these other ones are this next couple are of Sanford and right at Birkdale Commons. So everybody should be able to figure out where that is. So that's where you can see the Birkdale driving range, the tall, that's right there. So that kind of gives you a good idea of the relative height. And you can see the office building is first right there. And then beyond that would be the parking structures that you can see in the back right there. And here's looking from Birkdale Commons Parkway, looking over across into Birkdale. And you can see the office building from here. And here we are, Sanford and North Cross. And that's looking over right into Birkdale. You can see on the right would be the multifamily. And then as moving left, you see the hotel. And then left further is the office building. And point 6, this is to the right is where the Bojangles used to be. And the left is Bob Evans up there. And then you can kind of see the outline, the overlay of the shadow of the office building. And then a little bit of the multifamily and the parking deck in the back. And finally, this is the apartments down North Cross Drive, and that's looking, I think it used to be a Rubbermaid building back there, so it's right back there. So, and you can kind of see the overlay. I mean, it's very, very much blocked from this view, and you won't be able to see anything, especially with the foliage how it is right now. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And there's another bird's eye view.
Are you taking questions yet?
Not quite yet. Yeah, I guess if you have questions now. Sorry.
So yes, you're taking questions now.
Okay.
My only question was, Are y'all far enough along on your design? Was that a pretty accurate representation of the elevation of that building? It looked like it was all glass. Is that kind of where y'all are headed with it? Right.
Hey, you just want to come up and speak to the microphone?
So yeah, so that design, I think for the office building is fairly far along, and I wouldn't say set in stone, but as far as you know about the office building,
You just want to state.
I'm Nick Lombardo with North American Properties. 8712 Lindholm Drive. So part of that office building that we have designed, it has some concrete or metal panel. We're in between the two, but it breaks up the glass a little bit.
Thank you.
so that's it.
And that's staff's presentation.
Yep.
Okay. We'll open this up for questions. Mr. Gammon.
Yep, go back to the slide that showed the area being rezoned. I just want to make sure I'm clear what that area is. So the area you're talking about, the rezoning, is inside the hatched line?
Correct.
Okay, generally inside the hatched line. And I guess my next question is, when we talk about distance from residential, just to be clear, always wanted to say that and I hate that, but just to be clear, residential, so whether they're apartments or townhomes or the people that live on the second floor of the buildings, the shops in Burkdale, that doesn't count?
No, it does not.
So that is part of this development, so it doesn't count. So it's internal to the development, it doesn't count. It's the external properties that we are creating, that the setbacks are created for.
Well, never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. I figured that's what it was. Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, and we are looking for a recommendation from this board today on this amendment. And can you put the full text of the amendment up on screen, please? Just so we've got that.
I have it in parts because it's so long, so it's not going to fit completely on the screen. Is there a certain section that you want to see?
Okay, so you're adding that language to section 1 of the zoning ordinance. And then section 2, you're adding.
This is to the building type, Article 4.
Okay, and other sections.
Yeah, so this is to Article 9.45, specific to the hotel and motels.
Okay. We can go back if you need to. Ms. Allman, you've got a question.
This is the first time we've seen the potential renderings of the hotel and the office space. Last month, we didn't have the bird's eye views. Has anyone talked about bird glass? I mean, there's a lot of glass that Huntersville's never had to think about before. It's quite large for anywhere in our town. And it's really beautiful. I'm not saying that, but it made me immediately think about, wow, what it might possibly do.
Yeah, that is currently not something that we've looked into.
Let me go ahead and chime in here. So what we are seeing, this is the special use permit criteria, is that correct? Yeah. So to kind of hone in on the discussion, so we're talking about a tall building, and so it's going to be very visible. So if you look at this section, there's nothing in there about architecture and blending and all that kind of stuff. And so without that specific language, then, you know, whatever it is that they propose is going to be what's going to be acceptable. So as it's been presented so far, we have not looked at this, other than it just says architectural materials used on the portion of the parking deck exterior to the extent visible, public streets shall be compatible with the exterior of the hotel or motel. So with that view of the parking deck from the residential, they are kind of making sure that the materials match. But other than that, that's the only thing that's in there.
Any additional questions?
Well, and maybe it's more of a comment, or maybe it's a question for the staff more than the applicant, but why do we even need to have a height limit on the building and pedestrian zone?
Like a height max?
I mean, why do we need it? I mean, we had 48, and so it
You
can
asked
ask for
why do
100.
we need it for this specific
Well,
text
I'm
amendment?
just
or
talking about, yeah.
Anywhere?
Why not just take the height limit completely out of the picture? I mean, eventually, FAA or somebody else is going to control it, but, I mean, for now, why do we care if the next guy comes in and does a 160 foot? I mean, we're going to have this discussion all over again. Do we really care? I mean, nobody's going to come in here and build a 20-story building, I don't think, but they may.
I mean, I think the reason for the ordinances are to make sure that we prevent, you know, extreme instances of development from coming in. And by having these rules, we're putting in protections for some of our lower density districts.
Okay, but what's magic
We wanted
about?
to get rid of that, that's.
Well, I'm just questioning, what's magic about 145? The only thing magic about 145 is because that's what the applicant wants to put in, a 12-story.
Correct, yeah, I mean, that's the
So,
sole purpose.
so we're not, so there's no real logic in the 145. I mean, should we do more and say what makes sense? Should it be 200, or should it be, you know, whatever it is? I'm just asking whether we really need a height limit.
I'm gonna step in. This is their text amendment. This is not staff's text amendment. This is being applied for by the applicant, so that number is generated from their development.
I understand, but the ordinance changes that we're talking about has the 145. And the only reason the
They are
one,
requesting, staff is not requesting this. We are processing the application.
I understand.
on behalf of them,
I understand.
but They are requesting the 145.
I understand that. I'm just saying, while we're in the business of modifying the ordinance, why not?
So you're asking, they're proposing 145. Staff, what do you think? Should it be something more?
Yeah, should it be more
something?
than
We're
145?
comfortable with what they're proposing. For the reasons that Nathan said, we're keeping it down. Look, we are a town that is growing, and we are evolving. And Nathan showed you, and thanks to Harrison's question of, well, how has the heights evolved over time? That's why Nathan showed that kind of over time. And, you know, 20 years from now, we might be talking about something different, but we're taking it one step at a time, and we'd rather be incremental and deliberate about any changes rather than making one big change. And to be frank with you, I'm sure some people will see this is a big change. This is
a big
so
change.
so this is a big step in and of itself. So we're comfortable with what they have presented, but we would not recommend going higher.
Okay. So it's a defensive move.
Pardon?
It's a defensive move from taking too much heat over this. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, I'm good with, I'm
No,
good
I
with your
think it's
explanation.
a
I'm fine with the
prudent
explanation. Yeah,
step. And again, I would say, there's a number of people who say this is a big step.
It is a big
And it is. It truly is.
I'm fine with, that's a good explanation, thank you.
Any further questions and comments from the board? No. Okay, well, I'd like to open the floor up for a motion.
I move we accept the text amendment.
Okay, so you're making a motion to approve text amendments as presented by staff of text amendment TA 22-06. Do we?
That's correct.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. 2 seconds. Brandy Skelly, I'll second.
Okay, Brandy Skelly seconding. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, staff and applicant. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item 4B, consideration of a recommendation for TA 22-07.
All right, it's great to see you all. I will be presenting TA 2207, Senate Bill 105, and staff is looking for a recommendation today. The purpose of this text amendment is to amend the zoning ordinance to comply with Senate Bill 105 to limit harmony requirements for development on parcels where multifamily structures are an allowable use and the development contains 2 or more affordable housing units for families or individuals with incomes below 80% of the area median income. Please note the terms boxed in red above. The town attorneys consulted with the UNC School of Government on the interpretation of harmony units and the development. When the statutes do not specifically define a term and there is no case law defining the term, the courts will apply the plain language meaning of the term for the purposes of interpretation. The state does not define the terms mentioned, and the addition of the language to Chapter 160D 703 is relatively new, and there's currently no associated case law yet. Units was interpreted to mean more than one. Harmony was interpreted to mean an agreement or accord, and the development was interpreted to mean the entire development. So the town zoning ordinance has compatibility or harmony standards for new development regarding massing and architecture. Ordinance articles must be amended if the article imposes harmony requirements and allows multifamily as a permitted use or references building types for multifamily. Here is a chart for Mecklenburg County for the area median income. And you can see all the different percentages. This one talks about 80% specifically, and you can see the different income limits based on family size. So our code has allowed multifamily by right in most zoning districts since 1996 and says if you exceed the scale or mass of those around you, you can demonstrate compatibility by varying massing of buildings. So you can see that under NR, the NR zoning district, under the general requirements. And then this is an example of harmony requirements that are under the architectural standards for the apartment building type. And then this is an example of the proposed language adding into the NR zoning district under those general requirements. So based on the feedback that we got from you all at the last meeting, we tried to make it as specific as possible or as clear as possible what the added language is going to be applying to. This is an example of adding the proposed language under the architectural standards for apartment building types. And again, we try to make it as specific as possible so it's clear what that language is applying to. And then we added a definition that specifies the area median income used will be for Mecklenburg County. And then these are the zoning ordinance articles that are being amended. Thank you.
Thank you. One quick question, just to clarify. So the statutes do not define harmony, and neither does case law, as of right now.
I will defer to Emily or Jacob about the case law. The state, the statutes does not define harmony.
Okay.
That's correct, Matt. There's no definition in Chapter 160B as far as harmony. We also reviewed the legislative commentary regarding this specific session law, and there was no indication in the commentary about the specific definition of harmony, nor is there any land use related case law to this particular section because it is new, it just came out. And also in terms of other land use cases, those land use cases do not specifically define harmony in another context either, as I mentioned to you in previous emails. And therefore, we have to go with the statutory interpretation canons, which is applying the plain language meaning. And that is looking to the dictionary and also looking at the chapter as a whole to see if you can interpret what the meaning would be. And Kaylee, I believe that you did provide those definitions already in the staff report. If not, we can forward those to the board as well.
Yes, I did provide those in their cover sheet.
Okay, so just to confirm, there is no definition of harmony in case law.
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat that. I could not hear Matt.
Just to confirm, there is no definition in case law that you're aware of that defines harmony, to give us any more clarity.
So again, we would only be looking in the land use context. We would not look to case law that is outside of the land use context to attempt to apply a harmony definition. We would be looking specifically at land use cases. And we did not find a specific definition of harmony in the land use cases that we surveyed.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Gammon, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first thing is, I just want to commend the staff for clearing up and cleaning up the wording of this text amendment, because now as I read it, you know exactly what it applies to. And before, it sort of was ambiguous. The other item is the interpretation of terms that are at the bottom of this slide. I think that's important, and that clears up the meaning of what this text amendment and the Senate bill actually impacts. And so I don't have a problem with the wording. I got some questions. There's one, and we discussed this prior to the meeting. There were some examples to show how this new statute and what the ordinance is going to change. How does that impact our zoning decisions in the town?
Right, so I would first say that the, I guess, obvious answer is that it will impact, if you have a major subdivision, and within that subdivision you have a multifamily apartment building with 2 affordable units meeting the rest of the criteria, that the entire subdivision does not have to adhere to those harmony requirements. So that is going to change the form and the appearance of those types of major subdivisions.
And are townhomes considered? So if you put townhomes in a subdivision and you make 2 or more of those affordable, in the affordable level, does that apply just like the apartment does?
We define multifamily as 3 or more units. So I'm not actually, the answer is yes, okay, yes.
It doesn't have to be an apartment, it can be a subdivision with townhomes. That would make this come into play when we're making our decisions.
Yes.
I have some other questions, but I'll let it go for now.
Give me 1 minute, let me ask one question. When you read Section 105, or Senate Bill 105, in this particular section of it, the way it's written, there's obviously numerous interpretations that you could take. And the way I see this is, if you have a parcel, and in our town, let's say NR, for example, allows multifamily. So the way this reads, for parcels where multifamily structures are allowable use. So that defines it to a specific number of parcels under our zoning ordinance. We can impose a harmony requirement if the development contains affordable housing units. Well, those units could be single-family, they could be townhome, they could be multifamily units. So it could be 2 affordable housing units that are single-family that trip this. It could be apartment units, it could be townhome units. It doesn't, it's subject to multiple interpretations, the way this is written, the way I'm kind of seeing it. So something to keep in mind when staff's looking at this as this comes up. So, Mr. Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my next question is the staff is recommending that we put, if you would put back Mecklenburg County's, the staff is recommending that the town use Mecklenburg County to determine the median income for this process. Why not use Huntersville's median income, since we are talking about Huntersville? And I guess the follow-on question, Go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, I didn't realize you were trying to ask 2 questions at once. It's hard for me to see as I'm not there, but just to your first question, we had conferred about that, and as far as Huntersville goes, we're not in a census tract. We don't have any, so we don't have that specific data subset, to my knowledge, and I confirmed that with Bobby, that we would be able to use. And so it has to be where the development is taking place. And since we don't have Huntersville specific information, we went with Mecklenburg County.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So I guess not knowing, my question would be, how do we get that determined and have that provided for us? The state certainly didn't provide the funding for us to figure out what ours is, but how do we have a medium income. So how do we go, maybe we can't answer this question today, but what's the process for determining Huntersville's medium income? And can we use that, or we have to use this in lieu of the fact that Emily just said one does not currently exist? So.
And Franco, I would also just point out too, that area median income is determined by region, and it's distinct from average household income. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page of understanding that there are 2 distinct numbers that we're talking about. And so here we're talking specifically about area median income, which is regional, and that's why we do not have it specific to Huntersville, because our data subset is not available. As far as how to get them to move forward, it's usually based on population in terms of when they will decide to drill down and do a data subset for a smaller town. So you'll see places like Asheville, Charlotte, they may have their own municipal data subset, but typically it's a population threshold is my understanding, but we can confirm that and get back to the board.
Thank you, Emily. So I guess the next question is, and you just mentioned Charlotte, is how are the surrounding communities, towns, making a determination on medium income? What will they use? Is Matthews going to use Mecklenburg County? Is Cornelius, Davidson? Because this is more than an assumption. They have. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Yes, if they do not have the area median income available specific to their municipality, then yes, they will be using Mecklenburg County because that's all they have. And given that their populations are likely smaller than Huntersville, it is highly unlikely that they have a specific data subset for those municipalities.
All right, thank you. I'm done. Thank you, Emily.
Additional questions? Go ahead, Ms. Hallman.
Who monitors this after you come in? Oh, sorry. Who monitors this after a developer comes in and says, hey, we're going to have two or more units, and the town says great and approves, and how does this get tracked?
So when I spoke with Emily about it, She relayed that if a development is proposed as within the scope of 160D 703B1, is going to have the 2 affordable units or more, then it would be noted on the approved sketch preliminary final plat that 2 or more of those units have to be for families or individuals with incomes below 80% of the AMI. And then if it was constructed in violation of that plan, we would go through a code enforcement mechanism. But the town is not necessarily responsible. The units aren't being dedicated to us to take care of or look after.
And I'm assuming because of the case, I think it was in Wilmington, where you can't make a residential unit register. It was related to Airbnbs. Would that restrict our ability to require some sort of reporting on this?
I think I know what you're talking about with short-term rentals and having to register them every year. And that was, they decided, I think it was Wilmington, like you said, decided that they couldn't do that. But as far as registering affordable housing, I am not sure. Emily, could you speak to that? Would you know?
Again, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing Matt, I guess because he's in the center of the room and not at the podium or where Frank is. If I heard correctly, he asked something about whether we could regulate short-term rentals. Was that what he asked?
Well, more about if it was in relation to how you can't make short-term rentals register themselves every year.
Emily, let me try to step in here and moderate this. What Matt was asking is, is there a way for us long-term to monitor whether these units are affordable or not? And gave an example of the Wilmington who tried to require registration of Airbnb and how that was struck down, and and so that becomes a difficult issue. So let me try to answer this question. This is a big problem for us. The state comes down with a mandate and says if there's two units or more that are affordable and 80% of the median income, then you can't have harmony requirements. And so we will make sure that the permits, when they're issued, have that limitation, okay? What's going to happen 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years from now? That's problematic for any local government to try to go back and say, hold on a second, we just looked at Zillow or something and saw that these units are beyond. It will be difficult for us and every other community in the state of North Carolina to deal with this decades down the road. Yes,
you're hitting the nail on the head. One thing I recall from low-income properties that obtain tax credit or subsidized bond financing, there are prohibitions to the parties that receive those benefits, either the tax credits or various bond financing that's out there, on the sale or various other things associated with those properties for a given period of time, 30 years or something like that. They have to comply. Is there a mechanism we could use that, we can't make them register, but there's no clear definition of harmony that the legislature or the courts have defined. We've got what we have on that to give us guidance. It is what it is. But the legislation has been passed does not specify how to comply. There's one thing, if you sell the unit, you can, you've sold it to a person that's at 80%. But when you rent the unit, well, it's a 12-month lease. At the end of 12 months and they release it to somebody else, they could crank the rent up beyond that. And then how do we monitor?
So,
how do we comply? How does it
I don't have a good answer for that. This is a brand-new state statute that was tucked away in a much bigger, and that's why you couldn't even find what was the rationale behind it. I'm mentioning that to say that we interact with planners across the state. And I dare say we might be one of the first ones to be doing the text amendment to address this statute. And others will have to do it because it applies to everybody. So my point simply is, right now, I don't have a good answer of, is there a good solution to monitor? But I believe we will learn over time whether or not there's a way to try to do it. I don't know that there's going to ever be a good way, but it will be a peer-to-peer discussion with us and other state planners across the state to see, has anybody found a good way to stay up with that, particularly those rentals that you just mentioned?
Mr. Gammon.
Thank you, Jack. I can't speak for everybody up here, but I would probably, if I ask you to raise your hands, you would. There's no one, just make sure this conversation, I don't believe anyone on this board is opposed to affordable housing. The discussion, I think, is focused on is, yeah, this is a law, and we're going to have to do it. We've got the wording right, but still, what is the impact of this upon the town and our decision-making and what decisions we can make when it comes to a developer? So I'm going to be interested as we go down the road, Jack, to see how many developers come here and provide 2 affordable housing units in their development so they can implement this statute, or whether they're going to actually make an impact in affordable housing in this town. That's going to tell you something right off when this goes forward.
It's frustrating for us that if there's a 1,000-home development, 1,000-unit development, and 2 are going to be affordable, that's crazy. I mean, I'll just say that here on the record. You know, if there was some more guidelines in the statute, 30%, 40%, something along that lines, then you can start to make some impact. But we don't have that. So we are going to deal with what we are given. That's the text amendment that you have before you. And this clearly won't solve affordable housing, but it is, we understand what the intent was trying to do and trying to make sure that you can allow some affordable housing and not prohibit it because there's some harmony with the area requirement.
Mr. Whitaker.
Why the rush? I mean, if we're the first, is this something we shouldn't be the first on? I mean, should we?
It's law now.
I understand that,
So
but,
it was signed in November 18th, 21, so it's in
but
effect
the sheriff
now.
hadn't, the sheriff
Whether or
hadn't
not
shown
it's-
up, knocked on the door yet, right?
Right, but
So.
it's still legal
Should we
right now.
step out and be the first, or should we allow these other communities to sort of, let's get some, I mean, isn't there a league of municipalities or somebody that can try to figure this out for us? Well,
Hi, Harrison, this is Emily. I'll go ahead and step in. So I think it's better to be proactive and have some language in the ordinance rather than not have any language at all in the ordinance as far as parameters go, because if someone were to come in and say, hey, I just heard about this new law where I can put 2 affordable housing units in my development, but we don't have anything addressing it in our ordinance, that doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. There's a statute in place, which means that it applies regardless. But at least if we have something in our ordinance, even if we have to clean it up later via additional text amendments, we have something to go by and some parameters to look to.
the other thing I want to just make sure to get on the record is Huntersville does allow in kind of the core between I-77 and 115, we allow apartment buildings by right on one building, one lot. And so we provide more flexibility, I think, than a lot of other communities. But in exchange for that, the ordinance says that you need to blend in and the massing needs to blend in. Commissioner Kovacs is fully aware of a situation where we have a single-family home development next to an apartment, but it's not just a 4-unit or 5-unit apartment, it's a big apartment building, and there is real concern about the size of that thing and how it relates to their property. And through that requirement that we had, we were able to reduce some of the floors down and push back some of the building from the houses, and we said that is meeting the requirements. The state comes in and says, you can't do that anymore if there's 2 units. I dare say the text probably will change anyways, but now that the state is coming in saying you can't even tell them what their architecture's like, then we'll react, and it won't be to provide more flexibility there. It'll be to protect the homes around there. So I'll just leave it at that maybe some of these communities don't get into this and haven't gotten into it because they don't have the flexibility that Huntersville ordinance has. But we absolutely concur with Emily. We know it's the law. It's been the law since November of 2021. Let's go ahead and face this head on. And our town board is going to be talking about zoning and development issues Tuesday night at a work session. And this will be probably among some of the topics we'll talk about. Sorry, I just wanted to get that.
Any additional questions? No? Okay. One question for staff. So where we are right now and the kind of the exemption that this creates, we really don't understand what the full potential impact over time could potentially be. We know we can't regulate architectural controls on single-family homes, but everything else, or anything that is considered a single-family home, but everything else, we have some sort of leeway to have some level of control. In this particular case, that level of control goes to 0. If I'm hearing you correctly. Correct. Okay. Okay. That being said, if there are no further questions, I believe they are looking for a recommendation on this particular amendment, Mr.
I have a recommendation. I recommend we table this text amendment until such time that we get a better understanding of the definition of the terms and how this is going to apply.
Anybody have an idea of the legislative calendar for the fall? Whether they're going to be taking another look at this? Anybody? Mr. Gammon?
Is that a motion? Yes. Is there a second?
Is there a second? So the motion is we table this indefinitely.
But is there a second?
Is there a second?
Then I have a motion. I make a motion that this move forward for recommendation by the planning board and decision by the town board.
Okay. So
That the discussion needs to move forward because it is law, and the decision makers in the town need to decide whether we delay or not.
do we have a second? We have a motion to approve the amendment as proposed by staff of TA 22-07. Do we have a second? Okay. So we have a second. Any discussion?
I don't know if I need to amend it or not, but in discussion, I would say, in discussion, when we talked to the town lawyer, said she was going to investigate the facts about median income for the town and whether that can be determined or not. I'm not going to make that part of the motion, but I would like to make sure it's in the record.
Gotcha. Okay, go right ahead.
I agree with the motion coming up because I think that we need to give this to the decision makers, that we've done all we can at this point. It's not a vote to do that. It's not necessarily saying that let's just jump in with both feet, but that we need everybody's input.
Okay. Any additional discussion?
I have a question, being a new guy on the board. When we send something forward, it goes to either the planning board or the commission as a recommendation from the board, from us.
Correct.
So is there any mechanism to send something forward with a neutral recommendation or a negative feeling or
Our meeting minutes.
concern or something?
Our
Or is it accepted by the board and the commission as, well, they accepted it, they must like it?
I believe and Jack, you can, kind of fill everybody in on this. I believe our recommendation on matters, is passed along as well as our meeting minutes and some other information. So it's not just necessarily the recommendation that we make, to give folks, a better understanding of how the board was feeling on a particular matter. Any additional discussion? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, staff. Moving on to item 4C, consider recommendation on TA 22-10.
Okay, so the Huntersville planning staff is bringing forward text amendment TA 2210, one principal building on a lot. Currently, Article 8.2 states that only one principal building and its customary accessory buildings may be erected on any lot except that multiple buildings which, taken together, compose a single principal use may be erected on a single lot as permitted by the district regulations and described by building and lot type. Requirements of the subdivision ordinance, section 6.8 apply. We are proposing to add that the multiple building exception shall not apply to single-family homes and duplex house types that are not a part of a retirement community or congregate care facility. And this is one of the, this is the hamlet, one of the most recent and the first subdivision of its kind in Huntersville, where every single building, single family, and I'm not entirely sure if there was duplex on it or not, townhomes, were built on a single lot. So this is kind of what started the conversation. And planning staff recommends our approval based on the amendment being consistent with policy LU 11 of the 2040 Huntersville Community Plan, which basically speaks to protecting existing housing stock. We believe it's reasonable and in the public interest to amend the zoning ordinance because it'll protect the unique character of the existing housing stock, and the residential subdivisions meet the same development standards, and it is consistent with the definition, our current definition of single-family home, and it provides options for future transactions if the development falls through and they want to sell off the lots individually. Similar, this text amendment is also, I'll rephrase that. We are currently the only town in Mecklenburg County that doesn't have an ordinance like this. The one caveat to that is that Davidson will allow it if you go through a separate process. And if you guys have any questions, we can answer those for you.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Gammon?
Do you know what is that separate process that Davidson has?
You have to go through their master plan master process, I think it's called, or master plan process. I believe it's similar to our conditional rezoning process.
And that applies to both for rent and for,
Any subdivision, yeah. So for rent would still be considered and approved under our zoning and subdivision ordinance.
I'm specifically talking about Davidson.
That I can't speak to.
Okay, all right.
Okay. It's everything. Every lot has to be on its own individual lot, and the exception is for whether it would ultimately be a rental community. They have that option to go to this master planned process and be able to put them all on I guess, a common lot, single lot.
Okay, gotcha. Any additional questions from the board?
Last month, I asked the question, so in this situation, the hamlet, for example, they didn't have to meet the subdivision ordinances, and the answer that I did get was that if they had units that were more than 50, the parking lot would have been rear entry, so the parking lot was an issue in terms of whether they were subdivided or whether they were one parcel. So is there anything else that they didn't have to do because they were one thing?
Yeah. Since we're talking about that, I thought it might be helpful to have this plan here. So what the ordinance says is when you have lots that are less than 50 feet wide, then the access needs to be from the rear. So you can see then if these lots that are right here, so if we drew lot lines on each of these, then the lots would have been maybe 40, maybe even 38 foot. It would have been much less than 50 feet, much less than. So then they would have had to have the access. So then these parking lots wouldn't have happened, that they would have an access here, so the units would have been slid further off. They could have had fewer units over here. When they do that, then it will end up taking off pressure. You'll notice there's parking on the public street here, both sides of the street. So now our public street is kind of the parking lot, if you will, for this units. And so if they had that private, that access at the rear, then there would have been less need for this on-street parking. And I'm not sure if that, Amy, is starting to answer some of your questions, kind of what are the cascading impacts of doing something like that? So that would be a response I would have. Is that?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So the concern here is, if I understand right, from looking at the staff report and other things for the town board next Tuesday, is when you have this rental subdivision that's one lot, like an apartment, the concern is that if that whole facility, the people running it, were to go bankrupt, correct?
That is one scenario that we are.
Understanding that sometimes, in discussions I've had with other board members here, that specifically Matt, that apartments go belly up, and how that's handled compared to this. Now, I say what's driving it, is there a number here? I mean, if it's less than a certain number, they can still one lot, or?
So you're focusing on one thing, and you see multiple comments here, right? So the 2040 plan says we need to protect the character of existing neighborhoods. So what we're saying is, if each house is on its own individual lot, whether it's a rental community or a conventional subdivision, they'll be subject to the same development standards. So there's consistency there. The other thing we say is we have a definition of single-family home which talks about being on its own lot. So now it's going to coincide with that. And then the other thing we're talking about, it does provide some options for future transactions. So in other words, if they do go belly up, but that's not the main focus. It's just one of the elements. And then finally, as Nathan said, it's the same as pretty much everybody else. I mean, this is not an unusual requirement that your home is on an individual lot, and it's not going to hurt anybody because they'll still be able to do rental communities. So I just wanted to be sure the record clearly outlined what things we were talking about, and we're not just focusing on, we're just so concerned about somebody going belly up. All right, so thank you.
So what Hamlet at Huntersville is over. They're on one lot. There will be no requirement for them to go back and subdivide. This is for anyone that comes in the future that wants to build a similar type of subdivision, rental subdivision. That they have a requirement that they have to subdivide. That said, also, I think in conversation with you, it was with you, Jack, we talked about some of the EPCON. Originally, they did not have lots, and now they are putting lots.
Yeah, so we exempted retirement communities from this in congregate care. So there's 2 EPCON developments that don't have lots. These were the first 2, EPCON at Huntersville and EPCON at Kinnaman. Those 2 are EPCON projects. These are actually condominiums. So they're owned by people. It's the airspace inside the building that's owned by the people. The other one we have is the Glens at Burkdale. That's duplexes. That is not, these are duplexes and they're not on their own lot. So they are, and it's all senior housing in these. And to answer your question, Frank, or to respond, is the latest Epcon property at Eastfield Road has individual lots. They were experiencing problems with some of the homeowners on the condominium side of things. And so the last one they built was on individual lots.
But they're still condominiums?
No, they're individual lots.
Okay, so they're a parcel now, if you go on.
They're a parcel, but then, you know, your homeowners due means they're gonna pay for mowing your yard and painting your building and all that kind of stuff. The other one that we would point out to is the congregate care facility. So at the corner of North Cross and Stumptown, it's the Hope House. And they did an interesting thing. They're helping families transition back into normalcy, if you will. And so they actually built three little tiny houses, I guess is the term you use, 3 little tiny houses, so that families can move in there as they transition out. And so the way the text is written, this won't affect the retirement community or the congregate care. They'll still be able to do that.
Matt, excuse me, one more comment, I guess. Down the road, we will see other subdivisions. I've heard of interest. I know that there was a discussion at Brighton about someone putting a rental subdivision in. On one of the pre-development meetings, at least I thought it was, maybe I'm mistaken. It's not in Brighton, but it's near Brighton, okay.
I know what you, yes, I know what, there was a rental subdivision that went to the pre-development group, Brian? Pre-development group, and it was east of Everett Keith. Now, in that development, they were proposing individual lot lines. So they were not, they didn't do the model that was done at the Hamlet. They were doing a conventional subdivision, creating lots, but they're going to be rental. And so I guess I point that out is not all rental communities don't have lots. That happened to be one that was presented. They never went any further than that, but they had buildings on individual lots.
All right, I guess where I'm leading here is it's something that's a step beyond what we're doing here, but I've heard of discussions, people talking to developers and people who wish to put in rental subdivisions, and the rental subdivisions want to own the roads. They don't want to provide to the city. They want to have control of that. Is that feasible?
No, not under today's rules. You'd have to do a text amendment.
Okay.
Every road in Huntersville is a public road, except if you have a farmhouse cluster, then it can be a private road. And that's a 6-lot. And if you have 2 of them side by side, that could be 12-lot development.
All right. Question? Yes, sir, it does. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting up with me.
I have a
Mr. Whitaker?
Jack, you might need to answer this one too. Take that same scenario of a developer coming in wanting to build a total rental community of single-family homes. They're going to be owned by the developer, not the individuals. He's just renting them out. Do those also have to be on single lots? Or can they put those on, I mean, just they're apartments, basically, they're just individual.
Even if they have lot lines for each individual house and it's for rent, those would be owned individually by the developer or whoever owns the rentals.
Okay, but can they not have individual lots?
Currently, they could, which is why we're proposing this language.
Okay, but you're saying even rental.
Correct.
Right, that's exactly what this text amendment is trying to do. And again, it's to treat this, the rental subdivision the same as any other conventional subdivision.
Any additional questions? Comments? All right, well, hearing none, I'd like to open the floor for motions. Bueller.
I would make one, but I don't have my packet to read off of. Just read off that? Okay, I'll make a motion to consider recommendation for TA 22-10, a request by the Huntersville Planning Department to amend Article 8.2 of the zoning ordinance in Section 6.800 of the subdivision ordinance to exclude single-family detached homes from multi-building sites on one lot, with an exception for age-restricted developments.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve.
And congregate care.
Age restricted, yeah, and motion to approve TA 22-10 as written by, as suggested or recommended by staff. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? Motion passes. Last thing on the agenda is a discussion about fees in lieu related to recreation areas and open space. And I believe so this is what, okay, I'll let staff take that. And
You want me to just kind of set the stage and then turn it over to you? Or
yeah, and do you guys have the statute section, I think it's 804D, 160D, 804D, I think is the section.
I don't know if I actually put the statute section in there, but we mirrored it in I have our ordinance and we mirrored it.
Yeah.
Mirrored that, yes. So here's what I want to say about open space and recreation. So just kind of tell the story of that. So in Article 7 of the ordinance, it says that if you have a subdivision of property, basically if it's a small lot, which is less than 3/4 of an acre, then you've got to have urban open space within a 1/4 mile of every home measured along the street right of way, right? So this has been in the code since 1996. So from 96 till now, that's been the code requirement. If it's a large lot subdivision, which is over 3/4 of an acre, then it has to be a 1/2 mile, okay? It has to be spaced a 1/2 mile. So I just showing you some pictures of how, what they've done over the decades, right? This is Monteith and Monteith Place, and frankly, I'm not even sure. I can't remember where I got these other ones, but these are just examples of little urban open spaces that they put in the community. So these are spaces that are for the neighborhood, they're owned by the neighborhood, and I can tell you the Parks and Rec does not want to take care of these any little bit of spots that are serving just a small area. So having said that, now we're going to the ordinance. And this was the ordinance that was from the subdivision ordinance that was recently adopted. Some of this, the first part of the paragraph really didn't change, and the second part is getting to Matt's question or Matt's point about what the statutes say. So the top section, first half of it, is basically identifying a process for the public sector, whether it's a county or the town, to acquire a future park if it's identified on a property that somebody wants to subdivide. And so it sets up times that, the developer tells us it's in their boundary, then we get in touch with the Parks and Rec, and there's a timeline in there for them to acquire that property. That's the first part. The part, Matt, that I think you are getting at is this payment of funds, acceptance and payment of funds that the statute also provides. So the statute is 160D 804D. And so what the text amendment that we recently did when we did the quasi-judicial change, we said, pursuant to this NCGS 160D 804, the town may accept payment of funds to be used to acquire or develop open space and or recreation areas which serve residents more than one subdivision or development within the immediate area. All funds received pursuant to this section shall only be used for the acquisition or development of recreation park or open space. The formula to determine the amount of funds that are provided under this subsection shall be 300% of the pre-development property tax value of the subdivision site to be developed, and a combination of partial payments or funds or partial dedication of land may be allowed when the town board determines that this combination is in the best interest of the citizens of the area to be served. So that's kind of taking that statute and just kind of putting it right into our ordinance. So how that might work is, so this is the Parks and Rec master plan, and all you see is just bubbles, and those bubbles are, we'll look somewhere in this area. So that's not specific enough to say, this is where a park's gonna go. However, the Greenway is. So I'll just point you to the example I want to use. This is off of Gilead Road in Irvin Cook, and right here is what we call the Brown property. And there's a greenway right in here it's a Carolina Thread Trail greenway, and also is proposed. So this is the greenway right in here. And I'm sorry, is it shown on your? Yeah, it's McDowell Creek Greenway. So the one thing I want to point out here is what you not really able to see, but underneath this is green. That means Mecklenburg County already owns it. So that's where the greenway is going to kind of go. But let's just say the greenway wasn't on that side. So this map shows it a little bit better. Here's the McDowell Creek, and you can see the green, that's already controlled by Mecklenburg, so they're planning to build their greenway. Let's just say that wasn't here, and this property has now come in for subdivision. And so here's the subdivision. So again, this is a greenway area designated as a future greenway, and we know where it's at. And let's just say the county didn't control and wasn't planning to build here. What this statute does is allow us to work with the property owner to possibly make this into, if they want to dedicate this for a greenway, and we can use that, and we can approve it, we the public, because we're going to build one anyways, and then that serves as an urban open space that serves this development, and so I'm not sure what the distances are, but pretty much most of them I think are close to the quarter mile. And so that's a good example of where there's a identified alignment of a greenway, and there's a proposed development, and the open space can serve more than one community. We can use this statute to try to work with the property owner on maybe either they build it or they pay us funds or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of an example of how it might work. I apologize that stops it right there, but so I'm going to go back. Oh, Matt, is this? Yeah, that's the town's language in the subdivision ordinance that you can accept that. So, Matt, is that start the conversation?
So when the text amendment to go from quasi-judicial by right approval to administrative approval happened, this was a part of that amendment. And this was something, I think I'd brought up a couple of times, was kind of wondering why we didn't have it in our ordinance, and I'm glad it's in there now. But we've got the basics of it, but when you look at other towns and how this could theoretically be applied, we could likely go a little bit further here that creates a bigger benefit to the town. There are Mecklenburg County sites for greenways and parks and whatnot, and I'm assuming the town has got some sites that we own, but we haven't developed. And the cost of developing greenways and parks it doesn't go backwards, it usually increases over time. So the faster we can accelerate the development of those parks and greenways, the better off we are. And there may be some tools inside of this enabling authority that give us the ability to do that. Now, I'd emailed out some examples of some of the other towns, how they've looked at it and how they've done it. Right now, when we ask for open space, that open space is effectively private.
Yeah, so it's private unless it's been identified in a greenway plan. And I showed you the parks plan, they just have just big bubble dots saying, somewhere in this area here, we want to put a park. But the greenway, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the reason for this discussion is just to kind of talk about and start thinking about some ideas and ways and looking at other examples of ways this could potentially be applied to accelerate construction of greenways and parks and whatnot in our town that benefit the overall town versus just creating a bunch of private open space that only a limited number of people have access to.
And you provided everyone a copy of some, the other communities.
Yeah,
So
you
that-
know, like, I think it was the town of Apex, Fuco, Verena, Concord, Kannapolis, a couple of Harrisburg.
Harrisburg, right.
I wouldn't say that they're necessarily doing it exactly like the statute may require it, but it gives us some sort of idea of how others are looking at it and ways we may be able to apply it to our town that would benefit the citizens here.
So it gives us, so this starts the conversation. Is there a way we can help utilize the statute to try to fund some of these projects and end up with a win-win situation? So thank you for forwarding those texts from the other communities, and we will talk with our Parks and Rec department. We'll talk with some of those other communities and brainstorm on some ideas that we might want to do that might help fund some of these parks that we have, or use it to acquire land. So it could be used for acquiring parks, or it could be used for doing improvements on land we already control, which is what you said.
Exactly. So we have the beginnings of something that could be very beneficial, I think, to the town. But again, we've got to strike that balance between, the free use of real property and the public interest. So we have a balanced way of doing this. Brian, you wouldn't mind mentioning the change in cost of Greenway per mile that you're aware of, would you?
Speak to what it was today, but when I first came here 20 years, they were a couple $100,000 a mile. Now they're pushing $1 million plus.
Okay, so we've seen an exponential increase in the cost per mile of a greenway.
Yeah, over the last 20 years.
So in some ways, you could have said it would have been almost cheaper to borrow the money at municipal rates 20 years ago and fund it versus wait and fund it later because
All your choices have consequences.
Exactly. So with that in mind, if costs continue to increase at that rate, finding a way to fund things like this and roads and other things and using every tool at our disposal is in the long-term interest of the town. So.
I will point out, just to say that, is that a lot of subdivisions happen in Huntersville, the 90s and the 80s. And so at that point in time, lots didn't go to the middle of the creek. This is a great example. This is floodplain that the developer was not going to build on anyways. And so that gives quarters it is easier for Mecklenburg County to acquire these than it was if each of these individual lots went back to that creek. And that's thousands of examples in Huntersville where there's some common space there. So, and in some cases, developers just donate it to Mecklenburg County. They just give it to the county, which is great. So that's some of the good news we have, I guess you would say. But the construction cost, as you were just talking about, is way up there.
Okay, any comments, thoughts from the board? And if you get a chance, just take a look at some of the stuff that I emailed out, examples from other towns. Comments, thoughts? Nope. All right. Tim?
Based on the statute, does the in lieu of fees have to be used for a particular subdivision? In other words, if a developer comes in and for whatever reason doesn't have an area that they can use for open space, and they want to use the fee in lieu of, does that money have to go to development of open space that is beneficial to that subdivision, or can it go anywhere?
I'm going to try to answer that. I think I hear Emily riding around in their car or something, and so I'm going to try to answer that question. But it does not say, it doesn't say it has to be adjacent to, or, I mean, the intent was you'd want it to be, somewhere where somebody can access it, right? But there is no distance criteria, if you will, on where that, if we took the money and acquired land elsewhere, there's no proximity requirement that we have. And it's,
It just says within the immediate area is what it kind of gets at.
Thank you.
So, any other comments or questions? Okay, well, that was the last thing on our agenda. I'll open the floor for a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, thank everybody for their time today.